The fourth thing in looking at these polling, which is worrying, and you can do this on the Anhalt website very easily just by pressing a button, and you get one country, and then you press a button and get another country, and you get how people in country A view people in country B. And you know, you've got 30 countries on either side, and you can really get all sorts of crisscrossing views of countries. Very interesting to do. But getting onto this survey, what struck me as being really very, very interesting was that in terms of Australian perceptions of 50 countries, not in terms of overall reputation, but in terms, because the website didn't show that, but in terms of how those polled in Australia viewed the people of one country, and then again viewed the economic performance of another country, and so on. What happened when we pressed the button on how Australian people regard the people of Indonesia, China and India, the score was all in the bottom 10 out of 50. Now that really gave me grounds for concern. You can argue that these are big, complicated countries, but they are the three most important countries for us in the region. And this is what the score was from Australians. Now, did it portray ignorance? I don't know. It certainly suggested to me we need to do a lot more work in our community. And we've heard this cry for 40 or 50 years now, to educate Australians much more thoroughly about Asia. It seems to me that is one conclusion you have to draw from that sort of polling. You can dispute the accuracy exactly, but you know, that polling shows up. And it is also supported, by the way, by Lowy polling of Australian perceptions of countries in Asia. Not in quite such a stark way, but it nonetheless clearly comes through. When you look at Australians, they feel most comfortable with New Zealand, next with Canada, next with UK, something like this, and they're much lower down, Southeast Asia, then the bottom three tend to be China, India, Indonesia. Three most powerful countries in the region. Again, I suggest we have work to do. Now, coming from all this, what do we do about it? And this really is where we move away from reputation per se to how we project our reputation. Now, we have to do a lot more on public diplomacy. I have absolutely no doubt about that, and I'll come to why in just a second. But what does really come through very clearly is that we need to think a lot more about the sort of country we are. I'm not going to suggest that we should change policies that are important internally in Australia just because it doesn't look good overseas. I'm not going to make that mistake. I've been far too long in the game to make that mistake. What I'm suggesting is that we need to think more about perceptions of us overseas in the way we make policy. And that is because an adverse perception can impact on our interests. It's not just a feel-good thing. It really does impact on the sort of country we are. And my comment would be that if we are engaging in Asia properly, and we have to, A, because it's our own region, and B, because it is becoming increasingly important to us and to the rest of the world, we really do have to look at this issue more closely. Because perceptions, when they're really bad, such as the current perception of us in India, it can overflow, the polling tends to show, not just into how they regard our people, maybe into tourism, maybe into education. It actually overflows into other areas like investment and purchasing of Australian goods. But that really gets very, very complicated in trying to analyse because it really isn't clear, if you're looking very bad in one area, how much it impacts particularly into other sectors. It's really very difficult to get right. Asia, except the United States, different. And the countries of Asia have different historical backgrounds, different cultures, and therefore require a much greater effort if we are to convey to them what we are about, and if we are to understand what they are about. This is different from the Canadians or the British, because their primary focus is actually on countries with similar backgrounds to themselves. Now, I say primary focus. The primary focus of the UK and Canada now is really on North America and Europe. These are very big and very important countries, and clearly they have interests in China, Japan and India. I mean, I'm not denying that at all. The mere point I'm saying is, I'm making is this. Our main focus is on Asia and the Pacific, particularly Asia. That's our main focus. Their main focus is on societies which are broadly similar to them, namely Europe and North America. Okay, so that's why we have to make a greater effort than these other countries. Now, public diplomacy, complicated subject. A lot of people you mention, they say, what's that? It's basically conveying information about the way we work in a way which redounds to our interests, to the publics and to the institutions of the countries around us. Now, we did very successfully. There are a number of ways of doing this, and one is aware of it. Visits programs, terribly important. What's known as cultural diplomacy, terribly important. And that's in the broad sense. It's not just high culture, it's in the broad sense. Exchanges of educational, exchanges between educational institutions. Scholarships, very, very important. I mean, look back at the Colombo plan. All these areas. One where we have, I think, drifted back is on broadcasting. Now, the ABC does a first-class effort with Australia Network. I certainly don't want to criticise them at all. It's a great effort, and it really has an impact. But they have 1/10 of the money to spend on both Radio Australia and Australia Network as the BBC, Deutsche Welle, the German broadcasting service. It's got half as much as the Dutch use. And this is, for broadcasting and television transmitting into the country of the area of immediate importance to us, Asia and the Pacific. We need to spend a whole lot more money on what we do as a nation by way of positive broadcasting and television transmission into Asia and the Pacific. We should look, by the way, at the BBC model of non-interference in news programs. That's really not an issue, and we should, of course, continue to do that. But there is really an imperative in our using our resources to tell people more about what we are. Bring more people into the country, more exchanges. Now, you have to be very careful of this because there is a perception in the community that, if you just spend millions of dollars on delegations going overseas, bringing people back here, things going between the universities, cultural groups going up, it's a waste of money. So you've got to be very, very careful how you present it. It is really got to be presented in terms not just of feeling good and doing nice things with Asia, but really in terms of it's affecting our interests in a positive way. Now, looking, as I say, there's a danger of my repeating this to myself here. If you look at the figures of what governments in Europe, Canada, the United States spend on areas of public diplomacy generally, and then more specifically on what they spend on transmission, broadcasting, television, radio, you will find that in both those categories, the broad category of public diplomacy and the narrow category of public diplomacy, we fall well behind on a per capita income basis. And on the broadcasting side, hugely behind comparable countries. And just to show that serious countries are serious about this, the Chinese, who after all have an image problem, I think they would be the first to admit it, although be careful how they did it. But they are now spending something like $6 billion a year on television and radio broadcasting in terms of a public diplomacy program. And they'd be spending more than that if you looked at what they're doing by way of institutes overseas, such as the Confucius Institute and so on. My point is, we're really behind the game on this area. That's the first point. The second point is, it's more important to us than for most countries because of the countries that are in our foreign policy focus, who have different backgrounds and culture to ours. To me, it seems to me to be a national imperative. But I think there are two things we have to watch. I'm repeating myself now, I know, but if it sinks in, that's all the better. First, this issue of reputation is important. It's not just some sort of area of academic speculation. It really is important. More's being written about it, more's being discussed about it. Remarkably little in Australia, but a lot is discussed about it in Europe and America. Americans became very well aware of it in the aftermath of the Iraq War, and the need to do a lot more in this area. The second area, which is tied in with reputation, is how you project it better, and that's the public diplomacy side. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that will give you a little bit of food for thought. I know you have a very engaging and interesting program ahead of you. This is an area that I've spoken about which continues to interest me and which I'll continue to work on. But I really think we ignore it, at least over the longer term, at our peril. So thank you.